Dozens are killed after Guatemala's deadliest volcanic eruption in a century. Panic and frantic rescues in towns and villages buried by ash and hit by lava.
Not everyone escaped. I think they were buried. We saw the lava pouring through the cornfields and we ran towards a hill.
38 dead, 300 injured, 2 million affected. Some areas remain cut off. Fears about the giant ash cloud, the 8 kilometres of lava and the danger of further eruptions. We have the latest. Also on Global, Muslim clerics targeted in the Afghan capital. At least 7 people are killed in the suicide bomb attack near a gathering of Islamic clerics who'd issued a fatwa outlawing such violence. And a new career move for the former US President Bill Clinton. He co-writes a novel.
There's an old saying, at least in American English, that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm an old dog and this is a new trick.
Hello, it is a desperate sight, and those are just the places rescue workers have been able to get to. A huge volcanic eruption in Guatemala has killed at least 38 people, injured nearly 300, with 2 million affected. Rocks, ash, gas and lava have devastated towns and villages about 40 kilometres from the capital. Some areas remain cut off. Conditions are dangerous. Rescuers fear people are still trapped. There's also a danger of further eruptions. And in the last hour or so, there's been a 5.2 magnitude earthquake off Guatemala's Pacific coastline.
El Fuego is one of Latin America's most active volcanoes, but Sunday's eruption was the deadliest in more than a century. Ash billowed thousands of meters into the sky. The explosion forced rivers of lava and mud down to the communities below. Those that could fled for their lives. Emergency workers urged everyone in these villages to evacuate. These people are used to living in the shadow of El Fuego, but this was a close call. Many in this village were injured and had to be taken to hospital. But for some it was already too late. Their homes smothered in a thick layer of mud that had raced down the volcano at terrifying speed. It could be weeks before everyone buried here is found, their stories told by those who survived.
Not everyone escaped. I think they were buried. We saw the lava pouring through the cornfields and we ran towards a hill.
The search for survivors went on into the night and resumed this morning. Many people are still unaccounted for and the total number of dead is still unclear. Rescue teams are stretched and hundreds, maybe thousands of those who escaped are now homeless.
We are considering the need to call for a state of emergency. We have to see, according to our legislation, what could help us to do this. We think, until now, that there is a state of devastation in at least 3 areas.
The volcano was less active today, though another smaller eruption created further mud flows. That's complicated an already difficult task for these emergency teams as they search for bodies in the debris. The difficulty we've had is that the volcano is still active, he says. The lava has created very hot ground temperatures. Several villages have been ruined by El Fuego. Homes, property and lives destroyed. The rainy weather means more mudslides are still possible. And of course, another major eruption could come at any time. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Well, it's here now from an aid worker who works in Guatemala City. Duncan Dias, describe what it was like when the eruption started.
Well, the volcano, when it erupted yesterday, showered us here in Guatemala City with ash, volcanic ash. At first, we thought it was one of the normal eruptions, but then when quite small rocks as well as ash started falling on all the cars, we then realised it was more of a serious issue. And then I advised my whole team to stay indoors, keep windows and doors closed, and we're now having to make sure when we go out on the streets we're walking around with these masks on.
We're seeing some of the latest pictures in those towns and villages. Just describe to me there in the capital how much ash actually descended.
Well, there must have been a huge amount of ash, particularly on the side towards Antigua. That's where the heaviest amounts of ash is. Where we work here in the centre of Guatemala City, there is a layer of ash. Even this morning when we were on our way here to the centre in this small white Jeep, the Jeep by the time we got here was still covered in ash. So it is still falling, which is why we're still asked to make sure that we're wearing masks when we're walking around the city. But there's still a lot of ash to fall, and a lot of ash has fallen.
And we were just looking at pictures of people wearing masks, people being helped with breathing. How difficult is it there? I know you're a little way away from the absolute centre of all of this, but it is still, the gases are dispersing. How tricky is it?
Well, we found it very difficult yesterday. That come to our centre are off school today, so that we are here going out on the streets in a bit with masks on to make sure the kids that we work with are okay.
Well, we'll have more on the rescues. We'll have the latest information and also the latest pictures in just a few minutes' time. First, though, Afghan officials say at least 7 people have been killed in a suicide bomb attack close to a meeting of Muslim clerics in the capital, Kabul. The clerics had, for the first time, issued a fatwa declaring such violence forbidden under Islamic law. So-called Islamic State has said it was behind the attack. Well, the BBC's Shoaib Sharafi has been to the scene.
Kabul was hosting a grand gathering of religious scholars here today. Over 2,000 scholars from around the country had gathered in this quite landmark place, Loya Jirga tent, where Afghanistan's important decisions have taken place here. There was tight security, even the media were not allowed here, and the event was being televised through national TV. As the scholars announced their fatwa against violence and suicide attack, calling it haram and non-Islamic, as the delegates were leaving, the assailant managed to break through the security barriers and detonate his explosives here at the gate, exactly at the time when the participants were leaving. An official from the Peace Council told me most of the casualties in today's incident were participants of this big event.
Now, Germany and Israel have agreed Iran's ambitions in the Middle East are a concern to security. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting his German counterpart Angela Merkel in Berlin on a 3-day European trip aimed at convincing leaders to abandon the nuclear deal. The nuclear weapons watchdog, the IAEA, insists Iran is abiding by the agreement, but Mr. Netanyahu doesn't agree.
The United States has left the deal, and I think the real question we have to confront today is what do we do about Iran's aggression? What do we do about Iran's remaining goals in its pursuit of nuclear weapons? We discussed this in a very practical way. It's not important right now what was there before. What's important is what is before us now. And what we have agreed upon is that we have to act together against further aggression.
Well, Angela Merkel says that Germany will stay in the nuclear deal, but she does acknowledge that Iran's ambitions are a cause for concern.
Regional influence of Iran is a very worrying one, particularly for the security of the State of Israel, and this is why we feel that we ought to make every diplomatic effort we can in order to address the ballistic missile program of Iran, but also its activities, for example, in Yemen, the presence of the Iranian army also in Syria, and to exert our influence here in such a way that Iran is pushed out of this region, and particularly a region close to Israel.
Now, just days before the summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, and the North Korean leader appears to have ordered major changes at the top of his military command. It's being reported that over the last few months, the defence chief, the chief of the general staff and the director of the Army's political bureau have all been replaced. There's been no confirmation or explanation from Pyongyang. Our correspondent in Seoul, Hal Griffith, gave us his assessment.
The armed forces of North Korea's communist state are meant to march tightly in step with the party. With over 1 million men and women in uniform, the Korean People's Army is one of the biggest military formations in the world. It is immensely influential in the north and a centre of power in its own right. For this reason, leader Kim Jong-un is often seen flanked by generals on one side and civilians on the other, and why he asserts his control. Purges, reshuffles and the disappearance of senior generals and politicians are a way discipline is kept tight and the military in order. All of the newly promoted officials are younger than their predecessors. Kim Soo-gil is the one certain change, made head of the military's powerful General Political Bureau. This is him with the leader on a visit to a coastal tourist region. According to the South's Unification Ministry, this is the new chief of the North's General Staff, Ri Yong-gil, who was promoted from the deputy position. And this man, No Kwang-chol, is believed to be the new defence minister, also elevated from understudy as first vice minister to take premier position. With disarmament talks approaching with President Trump, these leadership changes could be aimed at preventing objections in the military to any tampering with the North's nuclear capability. One other obstacle is also presenting itself. Who is to cover the cost of the summit, which is to take place in Singapore? A venue hasn't been chosen, though it could be the Shangri-La Hotel. Some media reports suggest the cash-strapped North Korean government might have trouble bearing the cost of its leader's entourage of security and support staff. But an anti-nuclear campaign group, ICAN, has stepped in with an offer to use some of the Nobel Peace Prize money it won last year. They say they doubt they'll be called upon to pay the hotel bill, but made the gesture to underline that the summit is a serious moment to achieve the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. David Campanale, BBC News.
Now let's take a look at the day's other main global stories. And Jordan's Prime Minister has submitted his resignation after widespread public protests against austerity measures introduced by his government. Reports say Hani Mulki had been summoned by King Abdullah, who demanded his resignation. The demonstrations were triggered by higher food and fuel prices and proposed income tax rises. More wildfires are burning across the United States. The largest are in southern Colorado, California and New Mexico. Thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes. Hundreds of firefighters have been battling the flames. Colorado has declared a local state of emergency. The Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte has drawn criticism for kissing an overseas Filipino worker on the lips during a news conference. He was speaking in South Korea when he called a woman onto the stage and convinced her to kiss him. The incident drew cheers from the crowd, but it's been described by a Philippines human rights group as the disgusting theatrics of a misogynist president. Now, an almost complete dinosaur skeleton has been sold at auction in Paris for almost 1.6 million euros. The 9-metre-long specimen was found several years ago on private land in Wyoming, and experts believe it's likely to be a new species dating from the late Jurassic period, around 150 million years ago. So, back to all of this. The main story of the day, the volcano in Guatemala, the huge eruption which has killed at least 38 people and injured 300. Well, Andrea Izchu is a human rights activist and works northwest of the volcano. She described the events of the last 24 hours.
Well, it was 11 a.m. Sunday morning. A lot of people was just not aware of how big the disaster was. A lot of the communities around Escuintla and Zacatepeques, which are the mainly affected by the volcano eruption, didn't realize that actually we're seeing the biggest eruption that a volcano has done in more than 50 years in Guatemala. So we are really concerned about the quantity of the damage in the country, but also worried about a lot of people that has been affected.
And the numbers affected keeps going up. The number of dead has now risen, with the Disasters Agency saying that 2 million people have been affected. I mean, how much help do you think is going to be required?
It's going to be about millions of dollars to to rebuild communities also, and also right now for be sure of that people can have access to water, to food. A lot of families lost everything, lost their houses, lost all their belongings. So it's gonna take a lot of months, and sometimes it takes also years for a family to recover for all the things that they have lost.
And do you think there are enough resources in place? I was talking on this programme only about 15 minutes ago to Guatemala's ambassador to the UK, who didn't think at this stage Guatemala needed foreign assistance. Would that be your view?
No, I would totally say that it's really important, especially for the people that it's outside Guatemala, to find safe and secure channels to send and provide help to people that has been damaged. The Guatemalan government just said yesterday in a press conference that they don't have enough resources to provide the families any kind of aid for this disaster. So basically, that's why human rights activists and other kind of organizations outside of Guatemala start collecting funds so we can be able to send food and also clothes and create a rebuilding fund for the families for the years to come. So I will say that there's a lot of support that it's needed.
Andrea Issue. Now, still to come on today's programme, all the president's words. Bill Clinton writes his first novel, and readers are promised information only a commander-in-chief could actually know.